First responders. What is the stupidest reason someone called emergency services and what happened? A kid called 911 because he wanted us to come arrest his brother for not sharing the Legos from the Lego bin. You see, they were supposed to share, but his brother wasn't sharing. The caller's mom even told his brother to share, but alas, the brother declined. The bin had enough Legos for both of them, but the caller's brother said that he was playing with all of the Legos. This wasn't reasonable to our caller. There were too many Legos for one person to play with at the same time. Therefore, our caller's brother was a liar, a turd, and he definitely wasn't sharing, and mom said he had to share, so we needed to come arrest him. While hilarious, we wanted to do a quick check to make sure there wasn't something else going on. We had a high degree of confidence that this wasn't a coded request for help, so we asked to speak to an adult. After confirming that there was no actual emergency, we ended the call and recommended no action. Share your Legos, kids. Story 2. Well, I once sprayed myself in the eyes with bear spray as a kid and wound up calling the fire department. My initial perception was that you put bear spray on yourself, not the bear. It was an incredibly rude awakening. The fire department got a good laugh about it, while I vigorously poured water into my eyes as I continued to cry. Makes for a good story now, though. Story 3. Got a call for chest pains. Patient gave a really generic story, got to the hospital, and when the triage nurse asked what was wrong, I start telling her about the patient's pain. The patient cut me off to explain she wasn't having chest pain. She just wanted a ride to the hospital because she liked the socks she got in the emergency room last time she was there and would like another pair. Story 4. Elderly lady calls and reports that out of her 200 ducks, 3 were just stolen. Arrived to see an enormous mass of ever-moving ducks, and elderly lady says, "See, there's 3 missing. Just count them." Needless to say, you could count to about 10 ducks at most before you lost track of the ducks that were either counted or uncounted. Story 5. Obligatory, not a first responder, but the dumb caller. Climbed up into the hayloft of my barn, and while I was moving bales around, I accidentally jammed the door to the ladder closed. I didn't have any tools with me how to wedge it open, and I couldn't pry it up with my fingers. But I had my cell phone with me. I always bring my cell to the barn. None of my neighbors answered their phones, so yeah. 911, I'm stuck in my barn. Can you send someone to climb up the ladder and open the door? The worst part, I work in the hospital. I knew every single person, and they sent 2 cop cars and a fire engine for some bizarre reason that showed up at my house. To this day, I've yet to live it down. Story 6. So, there's a rather legendary paramedic where I lived, who you always hoped would show up on these stupid calls. Absolutely phenomenal medic. Also was tired of stupid crap. Got a call for a man down. Guy claimed he felt like he was gonna pass out, but hadn't had anything to eat except for eggs 2 days ago, and now he had a headache. Kept insisting he needed something strong for the headache. Medic offered him Tylenol or a rubber mallet. Also had a fire captain called for a cat in a tree on Super Bowl Sunday when his team was playing, 3 times. First time he told the lady, "Miss, it's no cause for concern. He'll come down when he's hungry." Second time he goes, opens a can of tuna at the base of the tree, and tells the lady, "Miss, notice you don't see any cat skeletons in trees very often? He'll come down when he's hungry." Third time, he used the forward reel line and blasted the cat out of the tree. Cat was fine, but wet, and he said, "There's your cat, miss," and caught the second half as I remember. Story 7. This is a story from when I was still working 911 EMS in DeKalb County, GA. We got called out to a disorderly call. Police had found a man walking with no escort laces. That's it. That was the reason we were given. I stopped my partner and the officers arguing long enough to get them both out of the ambulance so I could try to communicate with the man. He was an immigrant to the US who did not speak much English. I think hello, yes, no, and please were the only words he knew. With some very obvious hand gestures and a little help from an online translator, I was able to get his identification and a phone number for a relative who spoke some English. It turns out that he was trying to go visit his sister who lived 2 counties and about 33 miles away. He didn't have a car or a way of getting to them other than walking. He had been born in Taiwan and was used to walking miles and miles just to get to and from town for groceries, so this walk was nothing big for him. The bigoted, close-minded police had already stopped him twice and wanted us to transport him into another county, which is illegal without his permission, so he wouldn't be their problem again. The man's sister had collapsed and they had held him in the drunk tank twice and at a hospital for psych eval once. The family didn't know what had happened because police had refused to permit him a phone call since he couldn't speak enough English to ask for one. I shared my lunch with him because, of course, he hadn't been fed while being detained. By this point, the sergeant in charge had pulled up and was trying to throw his weight around on my partner. I got out to let them know that we were going to let him go. The sergeant rounded on me and tried throwing his weight on me too. I'm a U.S. Navy war vet. Drill sergeant mode activated. He was not in my chain of command, but I let him know that I was going to be talking to his commanding officer personally. He got in his car, left, and I filed a complaint on him, his officer, and the department for harassing a legal immigrant unlawfully. He was let go, and I offered to call a cab to take him. He smiled and said no, then bowed respectfully to me and walked towards his sister's home. I have never been able to find out if he made it or not, but I really hope he did. Story 8. Former ER nurse here. My absolute worst was a lady who called 911, claiming she couldn't breathe. She had a pimple on the inside of her nose, and it hurt to breathe through her nose. I rubbed some bastracine on her pimple, gave her a bus pass, which she refused, demanded a cab voucher, accused me of calling her poor, then called an Uber. Super strange encounter. Story 9. I work EMT. A fairly regular occurrence for me is very young men or university-age men who have inserted objects up inside and cannot retrieve them. Typically carrots, small pumpkins, but sometimes also torches, doors, or acorns. When you buy a sex toy, it usually has flanges on one end. That prevents the object from getting pulled in beyond the sphincter and disappearing into the rectum where it cannot be reached by fingers. This is a very traumatic and also embarrassing emergency for the young men, and it is also a very humiliating way to come out of the closet as gay if they are still living with the parents. Story 10. Not a first responder, but my previous phone had a virus and would randomly call emergency services twice a night while I was using it. Few times I couldn't disconnect in time and would awkwardly tell the responder it was a mistake. I still feel bad for wasting their time. Story 11. My cousin was learning about emergency numbers. She stole my Nana's phone, ran to my Nana's room, gathered my siblings, and called 911. Of course, someone answered and she flipped out. She immediately hung up without saying something. The operator calls back, but nobody answers. 10 minutes later, the police arrive. They said that they got a phone call from this location. My cousin immediately starts wailing in the background. My Nana calls for one of my siblings, who tells her that it was my cousin who called because she wanted to see if anyone would answer. My Nana apologizes and the police start laughing, saying that it happens all the time. Story 12. Not a first responder, but I worked with them as a security guard at a casino. We had to kick out 3 people in the middle of the night for bothering other players, asking for money, etc. They expected us to drive them home because their ride left hours beforehand. We told them no, as that's something we do for our VIPs only. They decided to call an ambulance, and one of them told the EMT their back was hurting. The EMTs loaded up the person, and the other 2 tried to hop in the ambulance with them, expecting a free ride back home. They were not very bright people. Story 13. I'm an EMT student, and on one of my fields clinicals, I transported a man who was concerned because his farts smelled worse than usual. Because of COVID, we have to wear respirators, and I could still smell it through that. It actually was bad. I seriously contemplated dropping out for a while after that. Story 14. My buddy became a cop a few years ago, and he got his first call ever. It was to a guy's house. The man was in his 20s and was pissed that someone was sending him junk pics on Facebook. My friend's first call was to show a guy how to block people on Facebook. Story 15. Had a lady say that she had syncopal episodes when she was stressed from dealing with her boyfriend and kids, or in her words, unexplainable fainting. She was also unable to explain how she had the fortune of bracing herself from facial trauma when her arms would brace her from falling as the rest of her body went limp. When we transferred her from gurney to standing, her vital signs were normal, and we got to witness her whole body go limp except for those muscles that would stop her from crashing on her face. Aside from that, we get a lot of patients explaining almost verbatim the signs and symptoms, as if they had just read it off of WebMD, but without showing anything. Story 16. My brother worked for the dispatching center for my local government. His favorite story to tell was when a sweet elderly woman called in to make a noise complaint on the next-door neighbors because she was trying to read her Mother Ducking Bible, and they were being too damn loud. Story 17. Edward Sanchez, once the captain of his Dearborn Heights Police Department, has not been charged with the crime of stealing and consuming marijuana from criminal suspects. The department investigation began when a 911 call was placed from Edward Sanchez's home in Dearborn Heights on the night of April 21st, 2006. A frightened Sanchez reported to an emergency dispatcher that his wife and he consumed substances brownies and thought they were overdosing. The catch was that the substances once belonged to criminals that Sanchez himself would arrest. In the 5 minutes long recorded 911 conversation, Edward Sanchez sounded panicked. "I think we're dying," said Sanchez. "We made brownies and I think we're dead, I really do." Story 18. Called to a woman's house at 11 p.m. because her feet and ankles hurt unbearably because she had been walking in high heels all day. Said she couldn't walk from the bedroom to the kitchen to make food, but she had walked past the kitchen to the front door to let us in. She lived 4 blocks from the hospital and confirmed that the car in the driveway was hers. Nevertheless, she demanded ambulance transport and got it. We definitely documented that we could find no medical necessity for the transport, and we're doing it at patient's request. Story 19. Our ambulance got called a few nights ago to a shaking portable toilet put up right outside of a homeless shelter with someone screaming on the inside. No one could get it open, and the caller thought someone may have been having a seizure inside. We get there and have law enforcement bust open the door to find two naked crackheads, a man and a woman, going at it doggy style over the crapter hole. They began yelling at us to close door for privacy. Law enforcement took them in for the night, and we went back to station to wash our eyes out. Story 20. When I was a kid, my brother, who was around 5 or 6 at the time, shoved a Cheerio up his nose. He ran screaming to my mom that a Cheerio was stuck in his nose and he couldn't breathe. My mom was terrified that somehow he could pass from one nostril being obstructed, called 911. An ambulance soon arrived, and an EMT ran into the house, and after being debriefed in the situation, squeezed the nose, crushing the Cheerio, and it fell out of his nose in pieces. Crisis averted. One of my favorite childhood stories. Story 21. This I heard from a buddy of mine. Guy called an ambulance because he shoved a toy so far up he could not get it out. He tried to drill a screw into the handle of the toy, grab it, and pull it out. Instead, he accidentally screwed his sphincter to the toy. He was literally screwed. Story 22. She called because she wanted someone to adjust her thermostat. It was 3 a.m. It was her 7th call for the same thing that week. An engine and a medic unit were both activated, read, woken up, because dispatchers only worked 12 seconds. Story 23. One day was waiting at the food store for a cab with my youngest sitting in the cart. There was an old payphone that looked like no one had used it in 20 years. You know, the type that looks like someone pulled it out of the city dump and mounted it to the wall. Well, my son got a hold of it and was chatting away about how he got his favorite food and how he could not wait to get home. My first thought was, oh, I'm going to have to give him a bath twice and some penicillin. Then I found out that there was someone on the other line. My kid picked up the phone, hit 911, and was proceeding to tell the lady on the other end about his day. Oh, I grabbed the phone, proceeded to tell her what had happened, that it was a big mistake, and prayed that the police were not going to show up. Story 24. I worked as a dispatcher, got trapped, pregnant, in my own freak house. It was a super ghetto trailer and I couldn't fit out the windows to fix the door when it fell off the tracks. Thankfully, I just had to call one of my off-duty cops to rescue me versus having to call 911. He literally had to take the door out the frame after he finished laughing at me, which was fair. Story 25. There's a shocking amount of people who call the emergency services because they got wasted at a bar and now they can't drive themselves home. Sure, kudos for not wanting to drink and drive, but that's not what those services are there for. Just get an Uber home. Story 26. CA7. You're responding to XYZ Street for the 38-year-old female who can't fall asleep. It was 1 a.m. I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt and think maybe she's been awake for 3 days or something, so I asked how long it's been going on. She said, 3 hours. That was all I needed to know. To the hospital we go. You call, we haul. Story 27. Pandemic version. There are 2 guys in the same car, and I don't think they live in the same house. Sir, do you feel they are an immediate threat to you? No, why would they be a threat to me? Good day, sir. Story 28. I happened to be standing in dispatch once when a call came in from someone mad that a plastic bag blew onto their yard from their neighbor's yard. It's pretty funny to watch a whole room of people roll their eyes. I don't believe they sent an officer. Was also in dispatch the time someone called 911 because they lost their pocketbook calendar and needed to know the date. She was scolded for calling an emergency line, but our dispatcher gave her the date anyway. Someone called 911 on me. At work, I was dealing with him about moving his illegally parked vehicle. Wasn't writing a citation, just asking him to move so I didn't have to write him. He called 911. I notified dispatch that they were about to get a call and got that dry. Copy, we've got him on landline now. They weren't happy. The dispatcher yelled at him, told him to leave me alone, total motherly figure, it was sort of cute, and sent me a backup officer. He yelled at her, too, but at least he didn't call 911 again. Story 29. Not a first responder, but I remember seeing headlines about people who called 911 when their cable went out before / during the Breaking Bad finale. That would feel like an emergency to me, too. But I know the EMTs don't troubleshoot cable / satellite TV. Story 30. A friend of mine is a firefighter, and they were called because this lady was on her way to the airport and forgot to turn off her lawn sprinkler system. For whatever reason, they went and turned it off for her. Story 31. Happened in my country recently. Man called police saying he beat up his relative so hard that he can't even move or breathe. The true reason he called the police was a lot of snow in the road to his house. He wanted it to be cleaned, so he said to police something like, bring some serious snow clearing equipment because it's a lot of snow here. When the cops came to the path to the house, was already cleaned by the local services. Story 32. Buddy of mine is a paramedic. The sheer number of people who call because of relatively minor cold and flu symptoms is ridiculous. Some days he's definitely saving lives. Other days, he's a glorified school nurse, handing out Band-Aids in Gravel Story 33. I'm not a first responder, but anytime there's an Amber Alert, people call and complain about it. They usually get cussed out by the dispatchers. Well, at least I hope they do. Story 34. Got a call for a diabetic reaction. Get on scene to find the patient in her apartment. Keep in mind, this is a very low income / building for those with disabilities, and it is very old and run down. She was walking around totally fine. We sit her down and start finding out the problem. She says, I need my insulin refilled. I don't have enough for the weekend. We explain that she will have to go to a pharmacy. Nope. She wants to go to the ER. Okay, fine. Get your stuff and let's go. Get out to the rig. We say, it'll be a quick trip since the ER for Hospital A is a few blocks away. We can see it from here. She is disgusted with us and our silly assumption that's where she wanted to go. She wants to go to Hospital B, 20 minutes across town. Okay, fine. En route, she refuses everything. No vitals, no blood sugar check, no questions are answered. Had to pry her name out of her. Get to the ER and we explain the situation. She leaves the ER 30 minutes later with no additional insulin, as it's a pharmacy job, not an ER job. Then she had the audacity to complain that we substances her across town to the further ER, and now she has to get a taxi home and can't afford one or find one, so she has no way home. Karen, you once tried to come to this ER for an insulin refill, an emergency room for a refill. You can't afford a taxi, but you can afford an ER visit? Story 35. Had a call for a lady who was having a severe allergic reaction. Like couldn't talk because her throat was swollen. She was freaking out and getting her whole family into a frenzy because she didn't want the EMTs to give her normal saline. Family claimed she was allergic to it as well, and we would hurt her more. To those who don't know, normal saline is just sodium chloride in water, and it's like impossible to be allergic to it. Police had to be involved because family was so upset. This lady ended up coding, and her opinion on the normal saline didn't really matter much because your heart stopped and you need to increase your fluid volume. Story 36. Not the first responder, but one of two dingleberries. Just got done with a long trip in the car and arrived at a friend's place to crash. My friend accidentally hit the emergency call button in his car, but immediately hung up. About an hour later, we heard some banging at the front door saying, "Open up, police." My friend says, "No way is it the cops," and proceeded to take out his knife. The cops heard a click and hid on the side with guns drawn. We opened the door slowly and bang, sure enough, they were cops. Friend put down the knife and everyone had a good chuckle. They were responding to the call from the car. Story 37. There's so many. Paramedic. Not my call, but the best one I've heard. I'm cold. Gave them a blanket and they were like, "That's better, you can go." 2 a.m. All these details are said over the air. Man has had a rash for 2 weeks, has seen a doctor for the rash several times, most recently yesterday, and has a cream for said rash. He hasn't used the cream since this morning, and the rash is itchy again. We get there and it's exactly as we were told. Man in his 50s, rash is on his ankles. He's woken up his entire family for emotional support and is fuming mad that he's itchy, throwing an absolute hissy fit to go to the hospital via ambulance and not one of the 4 cars in the driveway. So we went. Had one come in with details, coughing, short of breath, fever. Sounds very COVID, so we have to completely suit up at 3 a.m. Young man in his 20s walks out of the house to meet us. He's got none of the symptoms, he told dispatch. He thinks he may have a hair stuck in his throat from his haircut a week ago. He has already seen a doctor and been referred to an ENT earlier during the day and is now demanding to have x-rays completed at the hospital. I was not impressed. He was also very entitled and a little condescending, which did not help. We did not go to the hospital after a conversation about expectation. A man had a nightmare, though that ended up being more of a mental health call. So many edibles calls. Please, if you're trying them for the first time and you don't know your tolerance, take like 10 milligrams and wait like 2 to 3 hours. Don't take more. Don't take 40 milligrams when you've never even smoked before. One time we had to take an entire family of 5 to the hospital because they all decided that to stop their mom from being an alcoholic, they would replace one addiction with another. And weed is totally a healthier one. They were so prepared. Wings and fries on the table, fireplace channel on the TV with the lights dimmed, but one did too much and got really hyper, which made everyone else panic. So, 6 police cars, 3 fire trucks, and 4 ambulances later, they were a full mass casualty incident. Drunks in public that are too drunk for the cells end up sleeping it off at the hospital, taking up a bed. Personal opinion. Very annoying. We also have frequent callers. The root of it is anxiety and loneliness. 9 out of 10 times, but that's never what the actual call is. Our most frequent of frequent flyers passed away now, but she called approximately 7 to 10 times a day almost always that she was afraid she was choking on her own phlegm. She called 75 times in a weekend and single-handedly caused roughly 1.8% of our annual call volume. She paid for 2 24-hour trucks via taxes and system demand. Yay, Canada. The biggest thing is a lack of problem-solving skills. We aren't magic. So many people expect that if they call, we will instantly solve every problem. I've had a headache for 20 minutes and haven't taken anything for the pain myself. I vomited once and haven't tried Gravol or seen if it's passed. I have a cold and feel icky and don't want to be sick anymore. I took one antibiotic pill and it hasn't worked yet. My friends and family often say they're afraid to call 911 because they don't think it's worth our time and that the responders would be mad about someone calling for something stupid. I always tell them, I promise we have responded to worse. And if you have any common sense and you are thinking about calling, just do it. It's not a waste of our time, and worst cases, we reassure you and you decide not to go to hospital. It's all good. At the end of the day, we're here for you and your emergency. From your perspective, not ours. Story 38. A friend was a paramedic. He said it was fairly common for substances abusers to call ambulances pretending to have a headache just to get home-delivered painkiller shots, and some people who live en route to the hospital would use ambulances as a defector taxi service, demanding to be let you out as the ambulance drove through their destination. Story 39. A friend working dispatch had a grown man call because his arm had fallen asleep on him for the first time during his afternoon nap and thought he needed an ambulance. His arm started to wake up while he was on the call, but an ambulance was still dispatched. Story 40. I'm still in the licensure process of getting my EMT basic, but I've been on a few ride-alongs so far. Most of my instructors and others I'm learning from don't have a huge problem with being called to someone overreacting since, well, nobody's actually dying right now. As annoying as it is, there's still a strong sense of relief from what they've described. It's difficult to be upset at anyone for not dying. The worst is a patient that calls you and then refuses care. You know, the curmudgeon actively having a heart attack who calls an ambulance and then says, "What? Why are you guys here? I'm fine, go away." Often those patients prevent you from getting vitals and other important stuff just because they don't want to be asked questions. Story 41. I work in 911. A man in his late 20s was gravely concerned because he accidentally swallowed mouthwash, a quarter teaspoon of mouthwash. My mother called an ambulance for me when I was 3 because I shoved a bunch of sugar candy in my nose. By the time I got to the hospital, they had melted. Story 42. I worked in Tucson, AMR. There's lots of homeless folks there, and at night it can get awful cold. One night, homeless dude called us at 2 a.m. for a sprained ankle. I'm pretty sure he was hoping for a warm bed and hot breakfast. For me, this was the beginning of the idealism breaking. Story 43. 911 calls. No hot water. Parking questions. ATM didn't give money. Many more. But these were the dumbest called on an emergency line. I got other dumb ones, but those were non-E. So at least their dumb issues weren't considered emergency. Story 44. 911 operator here. I had a guy call in because Burger King messed up his order and he wanted law enforcement to do a report and help him get his money back. This is the kind of crap we get daily. Story 45. Not a first responder. While student teaching 7th grade, I was walking up and down the aisles, checking in with students on their science projects. This kid who wanted his regular teacher walked up to the desk to get supplies and dialed 911 on the desk phone and then hung up. They called back, and when I answered, I insisted nobody had called 911. They sent everybody, police, fire, EMS. Someone eventually told the principal what happened, and the student got suspended. And then I got yelled at for not supervising my student. Story 46. Some drunk idiots on a boat decided to prank call the Coast Guard. They said their boat had capsized and they needed help. Went out to the water at 3 a.m. in the middle of winter and waited around 2 or 3 hours for them to find the boat. When they found the boat, the drunk idiots tried to fight the Coast Guard as they tried to pull them onto their boat and take them to shore. Story 47. My boyfriend's nephew and his cousin called 999 and told the operator, a guy with a gun just stole their PS4. Not true. So of course, armed police were sent to their location. They were in so much trouble with their mums. I really don't know what they expected to happen. Story 48. I've had so many patients in the last month or two get super stoned and then call 911, thinking that they've suddenly developed deep vein thrombosis. It's so strange. It's the same call. Same, I smoked a little a while ago. Same DVT complaint. No idea why they think this. Story 49. Used to work in a hospital, got told of a person who called 999 every Friday night complaining of chest pain after a night of drinking. Obviously, ambulance sent straight out. As soon as it got to the hospital, he would just walk out and leave since his house was pretty much over the road. He did stop at one point. Can't remember why, but the paramedics gave him something to do, something. Obviously don't want to say much more due to gray area ethics, etc. and not too much memory of it left. First responders, how messy is the average house? Usually not great, but that's okay. I had a patient who was so embarrassed about the state of his apartment and having spoiled himself multiple times, he wanted to just be alone. He waited 3 days to ask for help. He could have died if he waited longer. We don't care about a messy house, and we have extra clothes and cess courts if things are really bad. Story 2, paramedic here. Honestly, I've been in more clean houses than dirty ones, and I want to stress lived in is very different to dirty. My own house isn't 100%. The dogs have dragged dirt in. There's a couple of plates in the sink I'll get to tomorrow, and there's some laundry to put away, but honestly, that's most houses. The houses that truly shocked me were the ones that were stone cold empty. You have no idea how many people live in a sparse house with one chair, maybe a TV, and literally nothing else. Poverty is hiding in plain sight. Story 3. I'm 73, left the fire service years ago, and found most homes to be neat and tidy. Unfortunately, there are 4 unforgettable ones. A hoarder's home jam-packed with useless junk. One house belonged to a woman with so many cats and kittens you couldn't even count them. Another was covered wall-to-wall in crucifixes. And then there was the basement, with what looked like makeshift prison cells, and portraits of historical dictators hanging on the walls. Story 4. Not a first responder, but social worker who has done a lot of home visiting. It's hit or miss, and lots of extremes, but in general, it's not so much mess as much as filth, and you never know whose house is going to be extreme. So yeah, I don't eat at potlucks anymore. Story 5. I worked for CPS many years ago. I did front-end investigations. We were basically first contact with families who had been reported. I've seen some filthy homes. Sometimes there was crap piled up everywhere, and sometimes there was hardly even furniture, but still filthy. Regardless, they all have the same smell. You can smell it even before they open the door. I still catch that smell sometimes just walking through an apartment complex, going to a friend's place. But usually, dirty homes were the best cases I dealt with. They were treatable, and with resources in place, those families would be okay. The worst calls we got tended to be kids living in regular, clean homes. I won't go into that. It's a tough job, and I'm really glad for therapy. Story 6. EMT in my other career, now a cop. Some homes we go into are nice and pleasant, and others are duck and gross. The worst is when you get that welfare check call where the neighbor hasn't seen Mr. Davis in weeks, and we show and see flies on the window pane and piled up mail. We know there's a deceased person inside, and it's always a duck and hoarder house. Story 7. Light to medium mess, I think. Most houses are clean, kitchen, bathrooms, etc. There's always some degree of clutter, etc. Maybe some baskets of dirty laundry, whatever. The vast majority of them look lived in but cared for dirty. Story 8. A fair amount is cluttered but not filthy. We don't care, that's not why we're there. More than I had anticipated to see, however, are hoarding situations and downright bug-infested Chernobyl. All income levels and all walks of life. You don't need wealth to be tidy. Story 9. Not terrible. Most feel lived in, not necessarily messy. There are a few areas of towns that I cover where you walk in and have to hold back vomit or suck in your stomach because there's just junk and furniture everywhere. Still get the job done. I always joke with patients saying that we moonlight as interior designers or furniture movers with the amount of rearranging we have to do sometimes. Story 10. I was a home health nurse. We were taught to lay newspapers down if we needed to sit or have somewhere to place supplies. Some homes were absolutely horrendous, but those mostly just made me sad. The majority of homes were right in the middle, but we still used newspapers with them too. Story 11. I was an EMT at my college during undergrad, so I was seeing a very different selection of living spaces than most first responders, dorms, frat houses, etc. Like others have said, most were usually lived in and a bit messy/cluttered, but usually not necessarily dirty, with the exception of some of the frat houses. The people who were most apologetic for the mess were always the ones whose places were sparkling clean. I'm talking like the mess is one sock on the floor. So a pretty mixed bag. In my time outside of college land. Story 12. Medic with more years on than I have left. We notice when the house is clean, because in most cases they are not. If you work in richer towns, you're going to have less crafty houses. The one random hoarder house in these rich neighborhoods is also true. But poorer areas equal nastier, dirtier addicts' houses. It just is the truth. Most people who has substances problems or criminal past flock to places with cheap rent because they have less money. Spend money on substances or have felonies so can't find a decent job. I've worked in both rich and poor. And rich is way better house-wise, but rich as well. You have to deal with rich, snotty people who think you are beneath them as an ambulance driver. Think you should carry them out the house on a golden pillow for their abnormal lab result they had today at the clinic that their doctor just called them about at 6 p.m. when the office closed. Don't get wrong. I've met some of the nicest addicts that have helped me put fires out pulling hose, helped out with carrying people out of houses. I've seen them move entire rooms to help access patients, thanks Met. But there are plenty more of the bad ones, unfortunately. I've been in fistfights with addicts, screaming matches, all kinds of stuff, had guns pulled on us. knives. But there's just this unwritten rule with the bad areas. At the end of the day, they aren't going to complain about you and get you in trouble, and you're not going to call the cops on them for bullcrap. You're also going to practice more skills as a medic in a poor area, more needle decompressions, more trauma, more violent crimes, people with way worse health from years of neglecting and abusing their bodies with alcohol and cigarettes, so more cardiac and intubations. So yes, houses are usually nasty, or I've just been in the streets too long. It does really make you keep your house clean. Story time. Had a lady once had been in her chair in the living room for probably 3 months. Never moved from the chair, was physically part of the chair at that point. She was probably in her 60s. Her son was just feeding her Met because he said it was helping her with her pain. It's August, no air conditioning in the house. She had just been using the bathroom there the whole time. We obviously got her very high on our medic substances and then had to pretty much cheese grate her off the chair with a big tarp. Then, when she was on the gurney, her legs were permanently fixed in a seated position, and every time we moved her, she would just pop everywhere from her joints and scream in pain. We get her to the ER. We would help the nurses from time to time because most of us had worked with them for a long time and did our clinical at the same hospital. So when they asked us to help hold a leg so that they could Foley her, and well, the worst smell of my life when they cracked that seal. But the worst part, the maggots had migrated north and had found residence in well where the Foley goes. Some things you just never forget. Story 13. No one come after me, but I feel like emergency services might visit people with nasty houses more often. As in hoarder house equals more fire risk. Someone who is careless with cigarettes or house has sketchy cooking / ventilation / illegal apartments without smoke alarms that start a fire, probably messy as well. Also, someone who can't take care of themselves is more likely to require M's. And if they can't take care of themselves, their house is usually messy too. But in general, where I work, regardless, a gross house is more common than a nice clean one. I'm not talking dishes in the sink and the trash needs to be taken out. Walls, floors, doors damaged, years of grime on appliances, never been swept. Indoor pets that pee everywhere, or droppings aren't cleaned up. If you're thinking / caring about how messy your house is, it's definitely on the better side. Story 14. EMT. Most houses are what I'd call lived in, meaning it's a normal house with normal messes. Maybe some dishes from the night before, some laundry on the floor, unmade beds, pet smells, clutter from stuff, etc. Things someone can clean in a day or two. Occasionally, there are places that look like a Silent Hill level. Hoarder homes and substances dens, situations that result from poverty and insufficient or zero mental health support. Only time I will remember a specific place is if there are enough bugs, roaches, around that will crawl on me. I think the more pressing thing is people don't think about home layouts that make it easy to get them out if EMS shows up. We have to either move furniture or have a team of EMS and fire department carry a person out of an awkward position and home layout because we can't get the gurney through. Story 15. Paramedic here. I think that we have a very biased point of view. I work in a very large city that includes all classes of society. Yet, it's much more common for me to step into a dingy, cluttered home with pests and / or rodents than it is for me to intervene in a clean, well-kept space. This makes sense to me, given that those who most often solicit our services are those who are in poorer health. The poor, immigrants, smokers, alcoholics, addicts, hoarders, etc. There are absolutely exceptions to the rule, and I'll be the first to admit that I've intervened with wealthy people living in squalor, as well as poor people who have nicer homes than mine. However, that isn't generally the case. At any rate, because we intervene more often with lower classes of society, I don't think we have a good point of view on how the average house looks. BTW, another poster mentioned that we don't care about a messy house. Nice answer, but we actually do care profoundly. If you have bed bugs or junk roaches, or if you're living in squalor, give us a heads up by mentioning it on the phone with 911. While I do have a change of clothes in my locker, the clothes I'm wearing eventually have to come home with me to get washed, and I rather not bring pests, especially bed bugs, home with me from work. No matter the state of your home, we'll treat you with the same level of respect and dignity as anyone else, but at least give us a chance to throw on a Tyvek first. Story 16. First responder here. Usually, not bad at all, but I live rural, so there's usually a stray chicken or dog about causing a bit of a ruckus. But overall, not as issue at all. Have occasional interesting houses with 20 years of newspapers, etc. Biggest issue is usually unkempt hedges or trees that prevent our vehicles from getting up long driveways or narrow roads. Navigating that can take time. Sometimes we have to grab our gear and mad dash it towards the house, which can take some vital time from us, especially in fires or cardiac incidents. Story 17. I'll put it this way. Where I worked, I'd be pleasantly surprised with even the simplest level of cleanliness. It really does depend on where you work and economic and social factors, but the reality is humans are nasty. Story 18. Pest control here. Not a first responder, but plenty of time in residentials. People are grosser than you'd think. I thank customers that aren't gross. I'd say it's 50-50 on a good day. Story 19. Was an ambulance driver once upon a time. In practice, this means I'm helping a little bit with the non-medical stuff, like asking someone in the house to fetch toiletries, the patient's meds, slippers, etc. I am conscious that people who are poor or mentally ill are also more likely to get into a medical emergency and don't judge. Usually if there is someone else in the house, they're at least organized enough to find the toiletries, meds, and slippers. Good enough. Story 20. Firefighter of 25 years. Most homes are fine. I wouldn't say they're sparkly clean, but they're not dirty. However, some homes are just literally unbelievable. There's been dozens, maybe hundreds of times in my career where we've walked in the front door and had to stop and stare for a second. Usually your nose is where it hits you first, that heavy ammonia smell from all the dog/cat/people urine. I've been in houses with dozens of dead birds still in cages, dead cats, hoarder garbage piled to the ceiling, houses with no windows, the ceiling collapsed and exposed floor joists, bed bugs so thick they were crawling on the ceiling, bathtubs full of poop. My all-time favorite, a guy sitting on the sofa completely naked with an insect nest on his junk. Yes. Oh, also the woman who hadn't left the sofa in like 2 years, and the fabric had fused to her skin. Story 21. You just can never tell ahead of time. The cleanest, neatest house I ever went in was so tiny. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, living room, kitchen. Spotless. I had to move an armchair to get the stretcher in, and there wasn't a speck of dust or lint under it. Baseboards shiny. Then the fancy neighborhood had a house with a cable spool for a table and curtains that were so cheap, and the place was filthy dirty. Another place had a woman whose kitchen was covered with fruit flies. She was elderly. While waiting for a higher level of care, we got her permission to clear out rotting fruit and wipe down her cabinets and make apple cider vinegar traps for the tiny flies. Yucko! Poor lady. Treat them all like they are your family. We aren't there to judge, we are there to help. Story 22. Hello, paramedic for 17 years, firefighter for 8 of them. I grew up poor in a poor area. Those houses are probably like the average house we go in, but it was honestly shocking to me how much less some people had compared to what I grew up in. Years and years of filth that has never been touched. Children with bugs crawling on them. The elderly who no one ever checks on. Houses meant for a family of 4 with 12 people living in them. Not everywhere seems like a first world country. It's a lot sadder than the average person wants to think about. Story 23. Not a first responder, but someone whose job requires them to meet people at home. I've been to hoarders' paradises at one extreme and multi-million-pound pristine white show homes at the other. Both make me quite uncomfortable, but for different reasons. Most people are somewhere in the middle, as in their homes are comfortably lived in but mostly tidy and clean, with the odd knick-knack or fun bit of decor here and there. Story 24. Not a first responder, but my work causes me to be inside multiple homes per day, every day. Observation. Most houses are decently clean, using the cleanliness of my own home as a baseline. People with very clean homes usually apologize for their homes being filthy. This apologeticness slowly fades the dirtier a home gets. Once you get a little below baseline clean, the apologies stop. Once you get down to dirty homes, there's an air of ignorance. Kind of like, yeah, I know my home is a crap and I don't care. You learn to deal with that. Moving down the line, you have the really dirty home. I'm talking the ones with an unflushed turd and every toiled garbage everywhere. A few spots of dog or cat pee on the floor, etc. Real biohazard stuff. These people are different. They typically have no idea how filthy their homes are. Complete ignorant bliss. Story 25. Working in DC as a patrol officer, I came across both messy and clean in equal amounts. As others have said, some people live with almost nothing. I had one I had to call CPS on and convince a child not to run away. The kitchen looked as if it was never cleaned. There were dirty diapers in the sink. Plus, no beds, just dirty mattresses on the floor. The mother was pissed that the kid acted out. He only wanted something to eat and mom was more concerned about getting more smokes. That one still haunts me. I just wanted to hug the little dude and tell him it would be okay. Story 26. I think saddest call I went on was a well-being check on an autistic older fellow. Guess his mom went to the hospital, never made it back. She passed. Older fellow didn't know how to take care of himself. House was in such a disarray. We had to climb through the window to get to him. He was covered in abscesses. His toenails had grown through his slippers. Had a laundry hamper full of soiled diapers. It was really sad to see. The good news is we got APS involved as they moved him into a family home. Story 27. Mobile crisis responder for mental health crises. I cannot express enough how much we really don't care if your home is clean or not clean. Many people will call with anxiety or death ideation, but don't want us to come to their house because it's not clean. We get it. Your mental health issues didn't start today. We really aren't judging you, nor are we going to freak out or call the cops if there is paraphernalia around. If you clear me off a place to sit, I'm golden. If you have a dog I can pet, even better. For the original question, most houses are a little messy, but not dirty. As in, the toilet has been cleaned in the recent past, but there may be dirty dishes, laundry, etc. There are extremes, obvious. I have clothes to change if I need to, though the most common reason I change after is evidence of pest infestation and not actual tidiness. Even if you have bugs, we want to come assess you in person and make sure you're okay and safe. Story 28. My job takes me into different homes every day. Always the homeowners, not a rental. That's another world. Now these are expected visits so people can tidy up if desired, and it's the ladies I meet with. I often go into every room. Most are very clean. Surprisingly, the clean and tidy ones say, "Please don't mind the mess." The worst ones just step over the clutter and ignore the pet stench. This is true in all price points of home. Story 29. Not a first responder, but I was a cable guy for 5 years in the Midwest. You can't tell from the outside, but I'd say 3/5 houses were fine, 1/5 was messy, and the final 1/5 I had to make a decision at the doorway if I was going to come back or not. Like absolutely filthy, revolting smells, front door frame filled with smashed junk roaches. I've seen enough things and I'm glad I work at home now. Too many times I've had to get undressed in the backyard and put my clothes into a trash bag before going inside. Story 30. There is messy, clutter, laundry, unwashed dishes. And then there is dirty, rotting food, insect infestation. The average house is messy. A surprising number are dirty. As long as my boots don't stick to your floor and I can fit the stretcher down the hall, I don't care about your laundry pile. Story 31. Not a first responder, but I deal with fire suppression system. I've seen folks in halfway houses have sparkling clean rooms, while there are folks who live in million-dollar condos who have boxes and junk piled to the ceiling, and vice versa, of course. It takes all types to keep the world spinning, man. Story 32. I'm not a first responder, but I am a mortician. So, last responder? I am in families' homes, often picking up people who pass at home. I definitely learned there are a lot more hoarders than we realize. Like a lot. Story 33. You know you're in a dirty house when you use whatever is around you as a barrier before kneeling down. But other than that, it was mostly the clutter. Story 34. My grandmother is a paranoid hoarder. She cracked her head open when she fell one day. She came to enough to call 911, unable to move. I was the only family member available to get to her house after the police and ambulance picked her up. Needless to say, the things they had to do to get inside. Destroyed front door and all the things blocking the entry door thrown to the side. She usually goes in and out through the garage passageway she made, but it's cheaper to replace a front door than a garage door, so they entered at the front door. Story 35. The messier the house, the more likely I'm going to be responding to it. Pretty much every human condition that results in needing frequent medical response also results in a messier home. If someone is sick enough that they frequently call 911, they aren't going to be physically capable of cleaning and organizing their home. If someone has plenty of help to keep their place clean, that means they also have more help with their medical problem. Take one of the most common calls, falls. A decent percentage of those don't have any injury. They're calling me because there is no able-bodied person in their home to help them up. Story 36. Average house looks lived in but not dirty, like having a guest over without being able to tidy up first. But there's a lot more dirty people than you realize, even if they seem totally normal on the outside. In a different category, there's a lot of people with mental health issues or disabilities that can't clean up as often, if at all. Most first responders have seen it all and understand life is hard, so there isn't too much judgment, as long as you aren't subjecting someone else to bad living condition. Too many elderly/disabled/kids in horrible situations through no fault of their own. Story 37. I have never executed a search warrant on a nice, clean house that had air conditioning in the summer and didn't smell like stale weed. Most of the houses and apartments stink, have vermin and junk roaches running around, always rotting food on the stove, and a poor, skinny animal eating out of an open trash can. Story 38. I have been in thousands of houses over the past 15 years. Most are normal messy, about 80%. A small percentage are hoarders, maybe 5%. We have to move boxes and furniture and junk just to get the gurney inside. Horrible smelling, and there's a greasy feel to everything. And an even smaller percentage, maybe 3%, are super clean, immaculate. No dishes in the sink, nothing but a couple of decorations on the counters. Not even TV cords are visible. Medications are put away, and we are handed an updated list of all meds and medical history. Of course, usually the nicer the house, the cleaner and less cluttered it is, but not always. Story 39. When I was a hospice nurse, I would sometimes be sitting in a dying patient's home for 12-hour shifts, medicating them, cleaning them up, turning them, making sure they were never alone when they died. I can tell you that I have been to many homes in central rural Florida. I have been in mansions, and I have been to homes where only the studs remain. And I could stand at the toilet peeing while looking at my PT straight through the stud from the other side of the house. To say it is very humbling is an understatement. The average house was pretty messy oftentimes because the PT had been dealing with medical issues for a while and have collected an array of supplies, medications, and etc. Combine that with caregiver fatigue, a lot of stuff just doesn't get dealt with. You walk into mail piled up on the dining room table, walkers, bedside commodes, medical supplies just scattered everywhere. House probably smells like urine, trash bags waiting to go out, sink may or may not be full. The bedrooms are usually the worst part. I had one case that the PT was the last person remaining in her family. Her and her husband, who died less than 2 years earlier, did well for themselves. The house they lived in was your typical upper middle class, early 80s brick home. The interior had obviously been taken care of because it didn't look like anything had been touched for several years, but it was very tidied. The candle warmer she had was still on, and there were cobwebs throughout the wax that had obviously not been disturbed since the last time it was changed out years ago. They were the original owners. But one thing that was absolutely and literally breathtaking was when you stepped through the front door and the smell of old stale cigarette smoke that absolutely took my breath away. It reminded me of the smoking room at LAS. I feel like DIA had one too. If you have ever ventured into any of these, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The white walls were completely stained with nicotine. I could pull a photo from the wall and see how white it was behind it. Meanwhile, you couldn't see very well out of the windows because of the cigarette. 2 of the 3 bedrooms were set up as an office and spare bedroom, taken care of prior as well. The kitchen appliances were the originals and still worked very well. The only thing newer was the microwave. Then you get to her bedroom. Walked in, and it was one of the nastiest things I've seen in my career. The floor was covered with feces, her mattress was soaked with urine, trash, and old food everywhere. She had a little path that she could take to get into her bathroom or to the kitchen. She was still there cognitively and could make her own decisions. She was dying of lung cancer and was still smoking. I called a coworker to come over and she almost vomited. We worked on getting her cleaned up and tried to convince her to come into one of our hospice houses. She refused. She wanted to die in her house. She had neighbors that showed up who I spoke with, and they told me about how they all generally take turns trying to care for her, but she was adamant with them that she wouldn't leave. So we set up a bunch of services to honor her wishes. The last time I saw her alive, they had set up a hospital bed in the living room, and she had 24-hour care from us. Truly a sad situation. Story 40, more clean than dirty, to be honest. Most of them look lived in, but not bad at all. Some of them are weirdly clean. Some of them are horribly filthy. It all depends on what you're doing there, I think. For me, because I was a military police officer, the reasons certainly went beyond medical necessity to enter a home. Domestic violence homes would go either way. Sometimes neither spouse does any cleaning. Sometimes one does all of it. Welfare checks on elderly or medically at-risk folks were more often on the dirty side. Sometimes people aren't physically able to keep up with cleaning. Sometimes mental health gets in the way. Sometimes they had been dead for a week or two. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Nobody should feel like they can't ask for help just because their home isn't spotlessly clean. The job is to help, not to judge you. Story 41. The average which a paramedic attends is probably not the average either. They're more likely to be going to people with long-term health issues, disability, and elderly patients. Obviously, they do attend people who were perfectly healthy prior to the call as well. Just their average is sicker than the average household, who are more likely, not all, to have issues with keeping a house clean and tidy, particularly if they had been declining prior to the call. Story 42. Mental health case manager. We do a lot of home visits. I'd say 5% of straight filth. The rest are mostly just lived in. The families with lots of kids or those with severe mental health illness are rough, but not typically. I'm not sitting on their couch bad. Very few are white glove clean. Story 43. EMT here. The average person, not bad at all. Like many comments on here, most are just lived in, where there might be clothes on the floor or empty water bottles on the desk, and probably cleaner than most of our houses. To be honest, I don't even notice the cleanliness or messiness of people's houses unless it's particularly obvious. If anyone is worried about calling 911 due to their house being messy, I'll tell me and my coworkers would agree, we really don't pay attention nor care. I really only care when it's so messy I can't find a place to put crucial equipment. So if you're a hoarder, I'd rather have you call 911 and get the help you need than die because you don't want strangers to see your laundry pile. Story 44. Not a first responder, but a memory that stuck with me. When I was a kid, my family came home from hockey to find out house completely filled with smoke. My mother rushed in and began cleaning. It really wasn't that bad, just ordinary untidiness. I was approximately 12 or 13, so old enough to know that we should really just call the fire department and go stand at the end of the driveway. But she was so worried that the firefighters would judge us for having a messy house. Turns out someone left the oven on and the smoke was just from some food in it. Everything was completely fine, and after opening some windows, nothing at all came of it. But yeah, Mom, for the love of God, that was dumb. Story 45. I would say average is just pretty standard clutter. Dishes in slash near the sink, kids' toys strewn about, laundry needed folded or something. There's a huge difference between lived in and being dirty. I've been to a house where all the furniture was actually just smooched up piles of trash with a crusty blanket on it. Rats running about, the smells, a mysterious purple sticky foul smelling liquid everywhere. Story 46. I delivered pizzas a while back, and there really are two types of homes, clean and disheveled. Some clean homes are also hoarders, some disheveled homes are barren and bleak. Story 47. You really get a mixed bag depending on the areas you serviced. I worked as a paramedic that covered a large area of urban and rural sprawl. More calls than not were in section housing, and houses tended to be disgusting. There is a difference between messy and dirty. Walking into a house filled with roaches, bed bugs, feces in the carpet, and the smell of stale weed and cigarettes was a normal occurrence. Messy houses with clothes on the floor and toys scattered didn't bother anyone in the slightest. As a layperson, you can tell the difference by if the crew refuses to set down their jump bag on the floor. If you are cleanly, we don't mind kneeling to get your vitals. No matter the level of mess, we would treat you like a person and do our damn dust to fix your problem. Story 48. Some of the worst houses I've been in are rentals that have been converted to illegal single-room occupancy. Bedrooms cut in half with flimsy partitions with doors added. Same for dining room and bedroom and really any other space other than kitchen and bathroom. People are renters, often poor. Landlord doesn't take care of anything. There's no real ownership of basic maintenance by the tenants since no one knows each other and are just renting subdivided rooms. Story 49. Rescue squad / dabbled in EMR when we had it. The ones you will see often are usually pretty bad. Your frequent flyers will usually be any of the following: obesity comorbidities, diabetes, congestive heart failure, renal failure. Those usually have a combination of medicines to treat the illness, as well as an overabundance of readily available foodstuffs. COPD, smoker house, substances abuse, possibly a hoarder house or flop house. Story 50. Once got called to an apartment with an indigent woman who had dogs. She lived alone. Those dogs did their business wherever. The animal waste smell was so bad it made my eyes sting. She, of course, lived on the 3rd floor of a 3-floor walk-up and was 300 pounds. At that point, it was a call to fire for a lift assist. Story 51. Former cable installer here. I've witnessed the entire spectrum. From a retired Marine Corps colonel whose house could have passed a white glove inspection and had everything smelling like pine sol, to a house so neglected I almost felt like puking the very second I stepped inside. And I only had that job for 8 months. Most people keep their houses in a state where they could clean it up quickly if they had to, but only have enough energy, which is the way I keep my house. I only remember the places that are extreme. They make for great stories, even though I was on that job for a very short time. Story 52. Former CPS worker. Most homes are lived in, but hygienic. The only times I've seen seriously unhygienic and / or cluttered homes were when the parents were using meth. OR thought they could get rich quick by breeding dogs / cats. They then don't clean up after their babies / toddlers, dogs or cats, and crap, feces not junk, builds up in every room of the house. Those houses are also overrun with pests, junk roaches, ants, silverfish, insects I don't even recognize. You can smell these houses from the street as soon as you open the car door. It's so gross. Story 53. My apartment was never dirty, but I had some dishes and a bit of clutter to get to later when a neighbor came to my door after being attacked in her apartment. I called the police, and when they got there, one of the officers was standing with me while others were interviewing her. I was like, excuse the mess, then caught myself and was like, but I'm sure you've seen way worse. He laughed and wholeheartedly agreed. Also felt weird as an afterthought to even have said that after she went through what she went through. Story 54. I'm not a first responder, but on average, in a different home, twice a day. I've had the same observation as many here. Houses are usually mildly disheveled / maybe messy. Few are gross. But the thing that really gets me is that you have no idea what people's homes are like, no matter how well you know them, unless you've physically been inside. The most put-together person could love in literal filth, and a dirty blue-collar guy that drives a better and needs to shower more could have a perfectly clean and put-together home. Story 55. So, I was a carpet cleaner, firefighter, UPS freight, and regular delivery. It says 10% of homes I wouldn't want to just chill in. 5% I wouldn't eat anything they served me. 2% I'm not going into. 60% are cleaner than mine. 5% were not friends, and if I dropped a simple food like a carrot, I might pick it up and eat it. 0.5% I would absolutely be willing to eat it. I had a customer that had us steam clean their furniture and carpet after anyone had been sick in their home. That's like $1,400, and they didn't give a duck. Story 56. I have seen piss jugs all over the house. Tissues that were saved after their fun time for some unknown reason. Houses with no water that have feces stacked a foot over the toilet, which they then proceeded to use the tub. Garbage as high as the kitchen counters, and the list goes on. While those are not the average, they are the majority of houses that I go to. Most normal and average people do not need assistance. Story 57. Not a first responder, but multifamily maintenance. I'd say you have a 50-50 shot at either walking into a hoarder, roach infestation, sanitation, 17 soiled puppy pads in the floor, 20 trash bags full of dirty kitty litter, rotten food, human excrement, table full of dope, adult film playing on the surround sound home theater system, or a gun in your face. All in all, not bad though. Story 58. Not a first responder, but my husband is a plumber. He goes into some very dirty homes, but he has never come and said, "This house was dirty." I asked him about it and he just shrugged and said, "Yeah, some houses are really dirty," but he doesn't care at all. I was embarrassed about someone coming to our house before I had a chance to clean. He said, "Trust me, they do not care." Story 59. Not a first responder, but I go into 5-6 homes a day without calling ahead first. Most homes are tidy. A few homes are disgusting and more are spotless, but the majority are just tidy and clean with some use on them. Pet and kids' toys, dust in the corners, pet hair in the appliances. The funniest thing is that people with spotless homes always say, "Sorry, it's so messy." Story 60. EMT for 7 years? They're usually not bad, they're just lived in. The ones that are really bad usually have a warning attached to the address that dispatchers give us ahead of time. Hoarder situation, bedbugs, etc. Otherwise, most residences I've been in are pleasant if annoying, since they're not designed to fit my stretcher. Story 61. First responders probably see houses that are messier than the average. Often, the people who require aid from first responders are dealing with pre-existing mental and/or physical illnesses, so they often do not clean their houses as much as the average person would. Story 62. I've never been bothered by messy or dirty homes. To be honest, I'll take a dirty-ass house over a fancy one that requests I take my boots off any day. The only thing that wigs me out are bed bugs, not dog poop, not cat pee, not blood or vomit. Bed bug. Story 63. Not a first responder, but I do enter around 650 apartments a year for safety inspection. The average apartment house is pretty dirty. It seems most people don't own a vacuum, broom, or care about piles of dishes. Story 64. Former AZ medic. 1/3 of the homes I entered were horrendous. Trash bugs, grime. I'm surprised to hear all these others say the homes they entered weren't that bad. Perhaps it was just the area I served. Story 65. Average is lower than you'd think, but not like teenager bedroom level. However, the gross ones are truly disgusting, and they can be scattered around places you'd assume would be cleaner. Story 66. We mostly don't go to the average house. Let's just say gross. And a lot more people are living in their own crap and piss than you would imagine, for various reasons. Story 67. Oh, you just reminded me. This was fairly recently. I was in the last semester of my degree program, and I was taking 2 insanely time-consuming courses at the same time. I also have 2 preschool-age children who are home more than they're at preschool. Anyway, it was coming into the weekend, and the kids had toys all over the floor, from the living room to the dining room, because I was trying to finish a few assignments. I went to make them macaroni and cheese for lunch, and one of the burners of the stove shorted out, and there was a minor electrical fire. Terrifying, but no damage. The fireman came in to check it out, and I had to kick a path through the toys to the kitchen. I was so embarrassed. The house isn't gross or unclean. It was just an utter mess from me trying to get through the week. Story 68. As a retired homicide detective, SWAT, etc., I've been in lots of homes. There were some well-kept ones and others that weren't. Government housing was pathetic most of the time, but some were kept up. The one that stands out in my mind is the home that all the sheetrock walls had been taken out of. In their place were strands of fishing line with empty beer cans attached to them, all the same brand, Miller. Needless to say, the place was stinky, stinky, stinky. After we made a few jokes and had a good laugh, we proceeded with the investigation. Story 69. Ex-cop, now plumber in the Midwest. I'd say it's 50-50 between cluttered but not dirty and clean in my experience. Definitely on the far side of each, you'll run into a spotless home or a hoarder home, but those are definitely on the fringe. When I was a cop, I definitely ran into more dirty or cluttered homes than I do now. Story 70. I'm a last responder. I also grew up in a hoarder's home. It's a mix. It's more clean than dirty in my opinion, but messy in others. POV is probably more on very unorganized and cluttered. But again, I grew up in a hoarder's home. My brain is different. Honestly, it's weirder when it's empty and neat. Story 71. Former child welfare investigator. The thing you have to keep in mind is our first responders' version of nasty gross is worlds away from what the average person thinks it is. And from a CYF perspective, What was going to happen is, I would work with the families to help get it cleaned, story 72. Not a first responder, just a neighbor. I had moved into a new neighborhood and the house across the street was inhabited by a very unfriendly elderly couple. The house lights were rarely on, and over a 3-month period I had only seen them twice. One evening an ambulance arrived across the street and then a fire truck. The firemen started carrying out boxes, and soon more firemen arrived and assisted in moving boxes to the front yard. Soon multiple neighbors and I were helping the firemen. The house was floor to ceiling, filled with boxes of magazines, leaving a 1 to 2 foot wide maze of passageways. Finally, after 2 hours, the paramedics were able to get the patient out of the house. Story 73. On average, pretty average, but damn, that once in a while hoarder with dog feces everywhere, stuff piled to the gills, no air circulation, unwashed sheets / bedding, etc. That 1% of homes are just unreal. Story 74. Worked in a very affluent area with many almost mansion-sized homes. It surprised me that several I was in didn't have much furniture. I also worked in a very oppressed area when training. While waiting at the door of an apartment, I could hear a buzzing noise. Once we entered the apartment, there was stacks of dirty dishes in the kitchen and garbage all over. The buzzing I heard were the thousands of flies. The saddest I seen was a house that was so full of trash and debris. There were actually paths that the family used to move from room to room. The home stunk of animal feces as they had multiple dogs and cats. We had to call Child Protective Services and seize the 2 children. The parents were sent to classes on parenting and taking care of their home. A few months after the children were returned, the dad was arrested for molesting the little girl. I cried when I heard that. First responders, what is the worst injury you have seen that was caused by the stupidest and most easy to avoid event? Story 1. I was a firefighter and we were call-led to a vehicle fire at midnight in a rural area. We get there and sure enough, there was a pickup truck fully engulfed. This wasn't the usual engine compartment fire. The whole truck was roaring. I was the nozzleman at the time on my engine, which meant my job was to be the guy spraying water on the fire. As I got closer to the pickup, I noticed an awful smell. I was relatively new, so I couldn't place it, but just knew it was putrid. My heart immediately sunk when I remembered there was a missing girl case in our area. People often stash evidence inside cars and burn the whole thing to get rid of evidence. Guns, clothes, even bodies. As I'm putting out the fire, I'm dreading what I'll find. Something was in the truck bed. The fact that the truck's owner wasn't on scene made me more nervous. Fast forward, and the fire's out. Turns out the truck bed was filled dozens of pumpkins. Thankfully, no bodies, but we had no idea where the driver was. A few days later, we heard from the cops that just before we arrived at the fire, a lone guy showed up at the ER with massive full-body burns. Turns out that as this guy was driving his pumpkins to a nearby farmer's market, he hit something in the road. His gas gauge went to empty and he smelled gas coming from his truck. The hero of this story crawled under his truck to assess the damage and used the only light source he had, a Bic lighter. Someone saw the fire and drove him to the ER. Some separate passerby was the one who actually called in the fire. Story 2. I'll take 2. Worst injuries. Bikers who thought going 300 kilometers per hour on a German Autobahn is a good idea because it's legal. Stupidest. A guy who climbed a fence to sneak into an open-air concert. His engagement ring got caught on the top of the chain-link fence when he jumped down, which really hurt his finger and part of his hand. It was past 10 p.m., so the gates were open and the entrance was free. Story 3. 25 years in the fire service. Pick one. A. Falling asleep with substances paraphernalia in your bed and accidentally starting a fire that left you with devastating burns. B. Getting drunk and hitting a tree sideways with your Grand Cherokee so hard that the frame rails met on the other side. Oh, and not being identified for 4 days because all you had was fake ID. C. Stopping your car on the side of I-95 to piss at 2 a.m., getting out on the traffic side, and getting waffled by a truck. Seriously, ducking drunk drivers. Nothing beats getting out of bed at 1 a.m., spending 5 hours watching the Stadies do their investigation, then going to work on 2 hours sleep. Here's one from within the last year that I didn't have to deal with directly. Some asshole walked into traffic to end his life at 5 a.m. on 95 in Greenwich, Connecticut. Got himself flattened, but the trucker didn't notice, and traffic kept running him over until 9. I went over the smear around 6:30 and noticed the clothes everywhere. 4 hours of the NYC commuter rush hour drove over. Story 4. I work in a hospital. There's a lot of stupid crap I've seen. Climbing things and falling off them in a big one. Skateboarding without helmets. I know helmets look embarrassing when skateboarding, but a guy came off his board and was in an induced coma for a week after hurt his head. Story 5. I met a guy while I was in the hospital ER that was getting out after suffering a wound to his leg. I asked him what happened, and he told me that his friend hurt him with a knife. I asked him why he would do something like that, and he replied, "We were both drunk and decided to see if I could feel it." At least he had a sense of humor about it. Story 6. A guy who lost his leg. His parents wanted him to help out around the neighborhood. He hit a curb and tilted himself out of the driver's seat and promptly got run over. Probably shouldn't give an 8-year-old a two-sided lawnmower. Story 7. There was an SUV full of teenagers driving down the highway in busy traffic. They are driving pretty aggressively. They try to pass a truck, but the truck is towing a trailer and can't slow down quickly enough to let them pass before oncoming traffic gets close, so they slow down and try to make a second pass. The 15-year-old in the back seat decides to pull his pants down and hang his ass out and moon the other car. Once they pass, they overcorrected and rolled. The kid doing the mooning was ejected and left in a 75-foot line down the middle of the highway. Story 8. I'm a paramedic. Saw a woman very messed up due to the lack of wearing a helmet on a job site. A big metal beam fell on her head and then landed on her legs, below the knee. Ended up having one leg with a completely broken set of bones beneath the knee. Tib-fib for those keen to the lingo. She was shimmer disoriented and had memory problems while I was taking care of her. Would forget everything every 5-ish minutes, and would want to take the splinting off her leg when that happened. Pretty crazy. Story 9. Some guy decided kicking a running mower blade that was jammed up was a great idea. He was nice enough to bring his foot in, though, in a cooler full of beer. Story 10. I was at work sitting there with my boss. This guy comes running in our office and cries for help, talking about his friend standing outside. We stepped out and found another young man holding his hand, clearly in serious pain, blood everywhere, and part of his fingers gone. We of cause help him, having a first aid kit, and luckily my boss being well taught in first aid. He then got transported by a helicopter. But the interesting thing is how he got his injury. Apparently the guys were having a BBQ and he took a circular saw to cut open their buns. I did this so often it never went wrong. Later learned that they were able to save at least one of his fingers. Story 11. The worst injury I've seen caused by something stupid was a man who crashed into a tree on the side of the highway. He had a nice gouge in his scalp and totaled his car. The reason he did this? He imagined the exit was about half a mile earlier than it was and tried to merge off onto the grass. He was also high as duck on whippets. Really strange to find an entire box of N02 canisters in someone's passenger seat and an empty whipped cream dispenser, which is the stupidest substances I can think of besides huffing paint. Story 12. Obligatory. Not a first responder, but my dad was in the 1970s. One of the stories he told me was he was called to an early morning accident on the 101 where a drunk driver got on an off-ramp and hit another car head-on. Both the driver and the passenger in the right-of-way car weren't wearing their seatbelts. The driver was impaled on the column of the steering wheel, and the passenger was launched through the windshield and then skid on his head. Both dead at the scene. And the drunk driver? Totally fine, since was so drunk he basically went ragdoll upon impact. Story 13. We responded to a call about a young man who slipped getting out of the shower and suffered a severe accident involving a bathroom object. It resulted in a serious chest injury. Dude was standing in the living room when we got there, plunger and all. How he was alive, I did not know. Our mouths were open after going in the home. Had to put him sideways on the stretcher in a position of comfort. Poor guy was just showering. Story 14. I was on the search and rescue team as a junior member in my teams. Only other junior member is an idiot, named Kevin of course, who wound up dating my sister. Also, an idiot is Rich, Kevin's adult friend. Crew chief tells them to watch the gear. Someone had jacked stuff out of a truck not long before. And ends with, and don't play around with crap. We go run dog drills for an hour or so. Radio flares. Hollow breathing interspersed with incoherent stammering. Crew chief has better hearing than me. Did I just duck and hear grappling hook? We get back. He did. We dressed it and took him to the hospital. Rich threw the grappling hook into a tree because they were bored. It bounced back and hit him in the head. Kevin radioed us, freaking our cause. He'd never seen a wound bleed that bad. It was just a drill weekend. Story 15. My dad is a police officer, and in the first few weeks he was working, he had 2 really bad accident calls. The first one was on a local highway where a guy had lost control of his uphaul and flipped it. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected. He landed most likely already dead, and the truck came to rest on his head. Only his head. This other one's is more gruesome. A homeless man who was sleeping near a dumpster was accidentally run over when a garbage truck pulled in to get closer to collect the trash. Story 16. My cousin is an EMT, and he said one of the nastiest scenes he came upon was a car accident in which the passenger had both of her legs up on the dash. Airbags deployed, causing severe fractures on both of her ankles, and pushed her knees into her face, causing breaking her eye socket. He said she was fully conscious when he arrived and in incredible pain. If I remember correctly, she survived and was expected to make a full recovery. Story 17. A theater was being renovated. The theater was designed for a specific show, and that show left after something like a 15-year run. One of the design quirks of the theater was a concrete basement underneath the stage, where machinery would push up some pretty impressive set changes from below. This means the stage had giant open holes in it, after all that machinery and stuff was cleared out of the basement. The holes in the stage opened up to a 30-foot drop with bare concrete beneath. The crew who was tearing down the stuff on the stage took some precautions to make sure nobody fell into those holes. They put plywood over the holes and set up caution cones all around them. When they finished tearing down all the stuff on the stage, the last things remaining were those cones and plywood. Someone picked up all the cones, and it was our future patient's job to pick up the plywood. These were long sheets of plywood, too big to just throw over his shoulder. So he just picked up one side of the plywood sheet and started walking forward, pushing it along the stage floor. He never even saw the hole he fell through because the plywood he was pushing blocked his view of his own feet. He fell 30 feet and tumbled on the way down, landing directly only his outstretched hands. He had multiple nasty compound fractures in both arms. Luckily, his arms took much of the force of the fall, reducing the overall impact. He still hit the pavement hard enough to lose consciousness and suffer serious injuries to his face and mouth. He woke up while we were prepping him for ambulance transport. He mumbled something to us, but his speech was garbled and ducked, mostly due to his injury, but also due to the spinal immobilization we put on him, which tucks underneath the chin. After a while, I realized he was trying to tell us that his hands hurt, which makes sense, considering the circumstances. Story 18. Rolled up on a guy that had oven cleaner burns on his arms from the shoulder down. He has schizophrenia and forgot to take his meds. He took oven cleaner, rubbed them on his arms, sat in his recliner for 2 hours, then called 911. All we could do is flush his arms with saline and dry bandage him before taking him to the hospital. People are crazy. Story 19. Not my story, but one that my paramedic dad has told me a couple times. A lady was standing under a massive oak tree in her yard after a nasty storm had damaged it. One of the limbs, as thick as the trunk on a normal street tree, was cracked, and this lady was just staring up at it, trying to figure out what to do when it broke off and hit her. My dad describes it as exactly like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Story 20. Former paramedic. Saw a man lose his life after falling 12 feet. 12 feet isn't that high, but when you land wrong, instant death. Story 21. EMS supervisor of a well-known party campus. Of all the calls with crap-faced patients, the winner is a freshman who drank 1 beer and attempted to slide down the railing of his 4th-floor dorm's stairwell only to fall 5 stories upside down onto the concrete basement floor with only his head as a cushion. On arrival, the pool of blood, twice his size, gave me no hope when I reached down to check his pulse. To my surprise, he not only survived his ICU hospitalization, he sat next to me on the first day organic chemistry a year later. Story 22. It was nighttime, and this guy was sitting on his front porch holding his neck. He appeared very intoxicated and said his girlfriend cut his neck with a broken beer bottle. I didn't see any blood at first, so I didn't believe him. Then he moved his hands away from his neck, and I realized how close the injury had come to being life-threatening. It then started bleeding. It was one of the creepiest things I've seen. I guess it could have been avoided if just he ran away when she threatened him as she broken the bottle open. Story 23. I was at Pride. Technically, I was off duty, but I helped the kid anyway. He had had a seizure because he took a whole lot of substances. The seizure wasn't the bad part, though. He was walking around topless and fell straight onto tarmac and starting spasming from the seizure, so his back and chest were covered with cuts. Goes to show, it's never okay to be topless in public. Story 24. I had a stroke in the bathroom, fell on Terset, breaking my arm, trying to apply pressure to wounds, spraying blood everywhere, trying to call 911. EMT in the back said, here's the first responder part, said, I look like an albino or one of the fishermen. They fish out the water after a week. I got 3 units of plasma on the long drive to a rural hospital. Pro tip number 22, if you live alone in isolated rural area, buy a medic bandage kit. Now on Facebook, I get side ads for bandages every time I log in. Ghouls. Story 25. A man had 2 large dogs that hadn't been properly cared for, and they started fighting over a female. He tried to step in and break it up, and it ended very badly. He suffered a severe facial injury and was also on strong blood-thinning medication, which made the situation even more critical. We secured the scene and rushed him toward the nearest level 1 trauma center, about an hour away. The bleeding was difficult to control, and we had to use advanced medical supplies to stabilize him during transport. It was one of the most intense ambulance rides I've ever experienced. Story 26. Thankfully, I did not see it as our response is over the phone, but we got a call from a car that had done a rollover and no one was responding. So we got police out there ASAP. At some point, a bystander came to the car and said there was no one inside, which was weird because someone had to have been in there at some point for it to crash, right? Well, about 10 minutes later, the bystander came back to say he'd found the driver. He died. We had to call the police back and let them know the driver was bisected at the waist Later on, the bystander reported he found the torso as well. Bad day to be a good Samaritan for him, I think. Some of the other people in the office were speculating it was a murder cover-up, but he probably just didn't have his seatbelt on. If your car rolls over and half of you is flying out the window, that's something that happened. Story 27. I'm not really a first responder, but I was actually just thinking of this the other day. I know a family in my small town that recently lost their son in a car accident. The son and his girlfriend were just driving around late at night on the roads around their farm that they have driven on hundreds of times. They got to talking or something, and he missed a turn, having to swerve and tipping his truck over. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt, so he was thrown out the window and hit by the truck. He passed away. His girlfriend was wearing her seatbelt and didn't even have a scratch on her. The truck itself was totally drivable. It was kind of dented on the side that it was landed on, but a little hammering out, and you wouldn't even know this car was in an accident. Moral of the story: wear your seatbelt. Story 28. Not a paramedic firefighter, but my husband did. Dumb 20-years-old kid with a few flight classes under his belt, but no license, takes his buddy up in his daddy's plane. They crash into a cornfield and aren't discovered for a couple of hours. Both are dead. Tox report shows they were drunk and had substances in their system. They were headed to pick up cute girls they met the night before, according to text message. My husband said it wasn't as bad as the degloved head they all thought was a Halloween mask, but it's a close second. Story 29. I'm a cop. About 4:45 in the morning, we get a call of a burglary in progress. Now we get off at 6:30 and have a whole night of paper to write before we go home. So we weren't exactly stoked to do this. Anyways, I get there first, and the two occupants come running out and say, a dude was trying to break in and smashed a window to do it, so they ran. I'm thinking active burglary in progress, so I get my buddy rolling code 3 in case this turns sideways. We get the house surrounded and decide, well, duck it. We got to approach somehow. We look through the fence and see what looks like a person laying on the ground. We make entry into the backyard, and sure enough, there's a person laying on the ground right by the rear door. Only now we can also see shattered glass and a massive amount of blood. We push into the backyard, and the guy is clearly dead. Medics on scene confirmed it. After further inspection, we realize that this clown broke the window and sliced his arm deep right where your bicep meets your forearm. He then walked from that location to the rear door and tried to enter there for a long time by how much blood was pooled on the ground and on the door. He ended up dying face up, spread eagle right by the door. The homeowners had no idea who he was. I ended up going home before the whole thing was wrapped up, and I never got confirmation on anything, but our best guess was this knucklehead was so high on meth he thought that this house was his and ended up smashing the window trying to get in when he couldn't open the door, cut himself, and just died. Story 30. 911 call for a guy with abdominal pain. Find out the guy had shoved an egg inside. After he had concluded he couldn't extract the egg, he grabs a spoon and tries to break the egg to get it out. This really happened. Dude hurt his rectum and eventually passed away from complication. Story 31. I've got one about a drunk driver, which is incredibly stupid to me, but this dude was pretty bad off. He was driving on a major road through my hometown, and I happened to be walking to a Taco Bell around 9 p.m. So I kind of saw how it happened, with a man in a large pickup truck going about 120 on this road and slamming into the back of a stopped SUV, who then in turn went spiraling from the force into someone driving on the opposite side of the road. The truck didn't stop, but somehow managed to 180 and go the opposite direction, but drove this time into a ditch and crashed into a telephone pole. I didn't really know which one to go for first, so I chose the truck. When I ran over and opened the driver's side door, the guy was barely conscious and blood was everywhere. The airbag didn't deploy. When I got him to speak to me, I noticed he had no teeth left, as they were all over the ground or smashed. I ended up pulling him out of the car and setting him upright, using his phone to call the police and then his wife per his request. I was 16 at the time, with no phone of my own. Upon re-inspecting the car is when I noticed all of the alcohol spread out. Could kind of catch it on his breath, but I was taken aback by the blood, I guess. I didn't really stick around too much longer after the fire department and professionals got there, but I heard of it on the news later on. No one else was hurt to my knowledge, other than the guy. A real miracle, as the SUV had a baby on board sign from what I remember. No matter what, never drink and drive. Story 32. Guy wanted to see what a junk ring felt like, so he used his wedding ring. Couldn't get it off and was ashamed to ask for help until it started turning black and blue and was in extreme pain. Story 33. Not a first responder, but this reminds me of that one YouTuber that stuck his head in a microwave and then filled it with cement. Like literally, what did he expect to happen? Did he even know how cement works? That it hardens? Anyways, it was a waste of time. For the first responders, in my opinion, had that guy been smarter, the first responders could have had actually saved a life of someone who actually needed help rather than someone who self-inflicted pain upon themselves. Story 34. We had a lady come in the ER a while ago at 3 a.m. saying she broke her toe. She said it happened while her husband was sitting on the floor playing with the dog, and she walked past and kicked his knee somehow. Anyway, I'm pretty sure they were ducking and had a mishap. Her toe was actually broken though. Story 35. A guy got off a bus having a text argument with his missus and walked straight in front of a car on the highway. Poor driver was 17 years old, parents in his car, and had his license for 2 weeks. When I got there, he was holding his phone above his face, still having an argument. It was quite funny. He was a big Maori bloke, and we told him not to look at his legs because they would hurt more if he saw them. His response was he couldn't look if he wanted to because his stomach was in the way. He also kept saying to the driver, "It's all G, bruv. It's my fault, Or really, it's dumb Karen's fault for nagging. Very avoidable. Story 36. House exploded because some dude was filling 1-pound propane bottles from a 20-pound bottle. The propane went down into the basement, ignited from the pilot light, and blew the bottom windows out of his house. His son was inside. Story 37. My mother was a police explorer in the 80s. She later went on to being a 911 dispatcher. She had to do a ride-along as part of police explorers or dispatch training, can't remember. The town she lived in has lots of gravel roads. On a blistering and muggy Iowa summer, the ambulance gets called to a motorcycle crash. They were speeding down the gravel and he was wearing shorts, sandals, and no helmet. He was literally pasted across the gravel, which acted like sandpaper. The girl passed away in the hospital before her parents got there. My mom made me swear to never ride motorcycles. Story 38. A guy at my high school was vaping in the bathroom last year, and because of his low tolerance and history of seizures, he fell over and started seizing after vaping too much and had to get stitches on his face. Story 39. Personally, speaking as a stupid person, I nearly lost my hand because I was cutting carrots on a mandolin without using the guard. I still have a scar, and I haven't touched the damn thing since. Story 40. 2, but I'm pretty new at this. Search and rescue, drunk solo, ITV, drunk nighttime snowboarding on an advanced slope by a beginner. I sense a pattern. Story 41. Not an EMT or anything, but was first on scene of a double accident as it was occurring. A pickup truck tried to avoid a car it pulled out in front of. The truck flipped several times. The first thing I noticed as it was flipping, which clued me into the accident occurring, and the car veered to the right of the road. The car hit a flatbed construction truck that happened to be parked off the road. After making sure the guy in the truck was okay, he was super disoriented. I sat him down in a safe area, ran over to said car that collided with the flatbed and had ignited at this point, and the engine was burning. The steering wheel had been forced down and hurt both of her legs. I was pretty sure the car wouldn't explode and was already on the phone with emergency. I didn't want to move her. Luckily, the next person on scene just happened to be a paramedic driving by. He helped me with everything, and I left after giving a brief description of the accident to police. I still have no idea if that woman lived, but it isn't likely she did. To this day, that injury was the most gruesome thing I have ever witnessed. Story 42. A friend of mine used to work in forensic chemistry. He was called by the cops to a suspected meth lab to prove the occupier had precursor chemicals. The place was being hosed down by the fire brigade when he arrived. The occupier was in the ambulance, having set fire to the isopropyl alcohol, attempted to carry the flaming pot outside and spilling the Elite IPA over his junk, thereby burning. My friend now uses bacteria to extract gold from electronic waste. Story 43. I was waiting for the bus when I watched an accident happen. Woman waiting at a light has her vehicle rammed into by another woman who was doing her makeup. The vehicle got hit was a large SUV, and the vehicle that was hitting was a small sports car. So the hitting vehicle basically ran under the other vehicle, which meant makeup lady got her face gashed up pretty bad by the bumper of the SUV. I've taken off my hoodie and I'm trying to staunch the blood and get her away from the possibly leaky vehicle when another voice starts coming from the car. The woman had her kid in the car. I should note the occupants of the SUV were largely uninjured. So I have to go back in and gather this woman's child, who, when I got her out, proceeded to puke all over me. Not sure why, but at least I was headed home anyway. I was called as part of the investigation into her reckless driving charge. Story 44. Obligatory, not a first responder. My brother was hanging out with our cousin on his birthday. My brother decided to make a quick run to the store for some ice cream. He got on his motorcycle and decided not to wear any gear since it was just a few blocks away. You can see where this is going. He lived in St. George, Utah at the time. A popular activity there is sand dunning. Part of doing that is slowing the air pressure in the tires. The motorcycle he took had tires like this. He was going downhill when the motorcycle flipped forward, launching him forward. Luckily, he was thinking quick enough to cover his head with his arms. His forearms got horrendous road rash. Bits of glass and asphalt had to be picked out. which was the most painful part, according to him. He also landed on his knee. He only had a couple scratches on his head, but his arms and right knee were messed up. A passerby saw it, called an ambulance, and luckily one was nearby, so he didn't have to wait long. To this day, he has big pink patches on his arms, and his right knee is a little weaker than the other. Moral of the story, even if it's just a couple blocks in town, always wear proper gear. Also, check the air pressure in your tires all the time. Story 45. Not me, but my old boss once attempted the avocado knife trick. He angled the knife incorrectly, it slipped, and he seriously injured his hand, which ultimately required surgery and a difficult recovery. Story 46. Not a personal experience, but one my paramedic grandfather told me. I'm unsure of the exact details of the accident, but he was called to a scene of a car accident. Passenger woman slid through the front window of the car during a collision. The glass had shattered. She went out feet first. Keep your feet off the dash and in the car while driving. For that second part of the all caps, do not stick your feet out the window while driving. Just to clarify, the woman was wearing a seatbelt, but the impact caused her to slid out instead of being contained in the passenger seat. Story 47. One time at my high school, a teacher went through an unimaginable tragedy. His son passed away after a friend mishandled what was believed to be a harmless airsoft gun, not realizing it was actually a real firearm. What was meant to be a joke turned into a devastating accident. Story 48. Not a first responder, but a local kid here passed away attempting to jump into a car via the window like in Dukes of Hazzard. Didn't pull it off, wound up cracking his head open on the pavement or breaking his neck. Can't remember which. Another kid decided to try to escape from the juvenile authorities transporting him, got out of the car on a bridge while handcuffed, and jumped into the river. They never found the body. Two more local boys here decided to jump off a different bridge while swimming, and it took days to find their bodies because the river was up. Story 49. Dude had decided to jump a fence instead of taking a few extra minutes to go around it. Metal fence stuck in between his legs. Fire engine is first on scene. Called for the heavy rescue truck. They had to cut the pole off and transport him to the hospital with it still in due to the risk of it cutting open a major vein or artery. Story 50. My brother is an EMT in DC, and he got a call one night that two guys were drunk and got into a machete fight. They both survived, but with major laceration. Story 51. I used to be a WFR. I lead hiking trips, and I had some medical training for wilderness setting. I was hiking up a mountain during summer, and I saw a hiking who was red, like his face and body were bright red. So I asked him how much water he had, and he said, just what is left of what was a small water bottle. I told him to turn around if he didn't want to die, and he did. Story 52. My dad works as travel police in the UK and mainly works on the train line. One story that I remember he told me about was this woman who ended her life by laying her neck on the track and waiting for a train to pass over. My dad arrived on the scene to find her, so he grabs the arms and his buddy grabs the lower half to carry it away. But he said that as he gripped the forearms, he must have triggered a nerve as the lifeless body's hands grabbed his back. Story 53. My brother and I, respectively about 5 and 9 at that time, were playing in our big-ass corridor by sliding on our socks from the very end thereof as far as we could. He got the highest score. As he gathered so much momentum, he went through the glass door at the end of it, hurt his arm, and I had to clean up all the blood as he was being rushed to the hospital to get stitched ASAP. First responders of Reddit. What accident do you see most often that is 100% preventable? Story 1. Wear your seatbelt in the car and a helmet on your motorcycle. 100% of the time. No excuses. Who say that they know someone whose life was saved by not wearing a belt? Honestly, I question the honesty. I never, in my limited experience, saw someone whose outcome would have been any better had they not been wearing the belt. I asked around, and I don't even know anyone who has seen that. We've heard stories, but I doubt their truth. Never seen a seatbelt actually get stuck either. If that bothers you that much, carry a knife with a serrated blade and you'll be fine. If you ever see what they have to do to people who ski across the asphalt, then you'll understand why you should always wear the belt. Who say that seatbelts cause more harm than good? I did some research. Now I can only do this with my agency's records, but you can search the contributing factor to death, serious bodily injury, or bodily injury and the mechanism of that injury, and one particular mechanism is the seatbelt. In the 50,000 plus accident report in the known system, there has never been any sort of injury or death that a seatbelt was even a contributing factor. I also want to share a quote that I saw in one of the responses. I have never unbuckled a dead body. Story 2. Always friggin' look at the knife when you're chopping crap. Similarly, your mandolin slicer comes with a damn handguard for a reason, you numbskull. And while we're at it, do not jerry-rig your food processor to work without the top on. Do not stick your hand in a whirring blender. Do not stick your fingers down the drain with the disposal running. You ninnies, your flesh is soft and squishy and blades are sharp. Story 3. I had a colleague who worked for New York Fire Department for many years. She would harp on how many people put mattresses up against outlets and hurt their children this way. Easy way to start a fire, and easy to prevent. Mattresses pushed up against something plugged in. Story 4. Nobody rides in my car without a seatbelt. If we get in a rollover, the last thing I want at that point is your unrestrained dumbass tumbling around the car and hurting me even more. Story 5. If you have old people in your house or you are regularly in the house of an old person, pay attention to and get rid of small area rugs, carpet runners, etc. They are terrible trip hazards, and a broken hip is generally the beginning of the end for anyone over the age of 70. Story 6. Never leave your child near the water unattended. Don't do it. Don't assume your spouse is watching. Don't tell your older child to watch them. I don't care how good a swimmer your little one is. Do not take your eye off of them. Story 7. EMT with 20 years of experience, also firefighter and fire instructor in the past. Ladders, bathtubs, stairs, lots of falls. You don't worry about this kind of thing when you're 20, but you're likely to fracture a hip as you age. Power tools. Wear your eye protection. Weekend chainsaw operators, myself included. I've nearly cut myself badly, by which I mean within millimeters, with a chainsaw twice now. Smoke alarms. Know how to respect animals and teach it to your kids. They should understand basic dog language so they don't get bit trying to pet someone's dog. If you live in gun country, you and your kids should understand basic weapon safety and respect. Heck, not just gun country, but I find people are more casual about weapons around the house in rural areas. People keeping a loaded rifle and shooting deer out their back window, and no, I'm not exaggerating. Don't ride motorcycles if you have dependents. Story 8. Wilderness. First responder here. So have a slightly different perspective on this. Drink water, hydrate yourself, drink before you're thirsty, sip regularly, not chug randomly. And for the love of the flying spaghetti monster, don't rely on that piss-warm camelback water to help you. Cold and common helps you stay clear and copious. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke can both be prevented by adequately hydrating and keeping your miracle of a temperature regulating organs functioning. Don't drag your family somewhere and expect everything to be right where it was a decade ago. And don't expect to be some survival expert just because you watched/read something. Know where you can refill on potable water, and if you don't find out ahead of time, talk to a damn park ranger or someone who looks like they know what is going on. I see this way too much down here in Texas and throughout the North American Southwest. Oh, and please come enjoy the outdoors. I love working with folks to help y'all do something in nature. Story 9. Paramedic here. Overdose. I see so many calls for people who intentionally or accidentally shoot up too much heroin. It takes too many Norco. Then their breathing slows, they lose consciousness, and eventually they stop breathing altogether. You better hope someone calls 911 for you then. Paramedic units have Narcan, an antidote to reverse the effects. But sometimes we get there too late. And not all ambulances have Narcan. An EMT-only unit would not have Narcan, and then you would be screwed and have to rely on their skills with a BVM to breathe for you. I work in Detroit and the nice cities nearby. Heroin and opiate overdoses do not discriminate. Every age, gender, race, and socioeconomic status is affected. If you don't think it's happening in your community, you are wrong. It could happen to you or someone you know. Never, ever try substances or take someone else's pills. And if you are prescribed opiates, only take them exactly as prescribed and for as short a time as possible. Story 10. I'm not a first responder, but everyone should know the signs of a stroke. My dad had a stroke and I didn't notice the signs, so he didn't get to the ER for another 3 hours. Now he has permanent damage to his communication skills. It makes me sad to know I could have possibly reduced the severity if I had got him to the ER right away. My dad was only 45. And his stroke made his life so much more difficult. I would do anything to reverse it. Numbness or weakness in your face, arm, or leg, especially on one side. Confusion or trouble understanding other people. Trouble speaking, trouble seeing with one or both eyes. Trouble walking or staying balanced or coordinated. Dizziness. Severe headache that comes on for no known reason. I should also add that we had the attitude of not needing to go to the ER unless it was severe. I knew something was wrong, I just couldn't say what. We thought he was just overworked and dehydrated. If you notice something is wrong with someone, don't hesitate to call for help. Story 11. I heard this question being asked on a radio show while I was driving one day. I had the window halfway open. The EMT said, if you're in a car, open the window all the way or not at all. Before he could finish it, dawned on me what he was about to say, and I rolled it down all the way. Apparently, so many car accidents become much worse than they would have been due to severe head lacerations from the window edge. Story 12. I'm a hazmat emergency responder, so the things I usually deal with aren't too common in a residential setting. That being said, try not to have any mercury in the house. If you do and it does spill, do not vacuum it. Your best bet is to call local fire/health department. If anything comes into contact with it, throw it out immediately, typically cess squirts, brooms, mops, etc. Honestly, mercury is nowhere near one of the most dangerous substances we deal with, but it is a Karen to get out of a house once it's been there for a while and can be extremely expensive. It also is often not covered in many home insurance policies. If you can avoid having it in your house, do, and hopefully you'll never run into any of us hazmat guys. Story 13. Not a first responder, but I have a great example. My uncle was in a car crash when he was in his teens. A person behind him tried to help him when he was found in the car, passed out. He dragged him back to the side of the road to wait for paramedics. In the process, he dislocated his broken neck, paralyzing. You never move a victim from a car if there's a possibility of neck injury. Story 14. Alcohol poison. I see so many way too drunk biddies at frat parties. Many times they get transported to the hospital. If you're younger and have no real experience with alcohol before, sure, I'm sorry you had this situation and now you know. But when I see older college girls just completely out of control, throwing up and all over the place, it's like, you know your tolerance, and now you're making all these other people take care of you. Story 15. Don't take substances if you or your buddies don't know what you're doing. A 43 degrees Celsius sunny day at a music festival is not a good time to start taking 2 full pills drunk. Story 16. My dad's a firefighter. He says that a lot of injuries to the elderly are caused by rugs everywhere. They end up tripping on the rugs and breaking knees or hips. Story 17. I'm from a rural area, so this might not be useful for cities, but always secure your ladders. Whether you go into a tree or on a roof, very dangerous even with a ladder. Especially elderly people, thinking they can still do it as they did for the last 60 years. If you have anything containing asbestos, get rid of it now. And do not climb on an asbestos roof, it just cracks without warning. Turn any electric system off and unplug it before opening it, or shut down electricity in the whole room or house. Last but not least, do never put your fingers in any working machine. You tell it to your children, but you shouldn't either. Although I'm also a first responder, all those situations involve some of my relatives, all of them at least 60. Story 18. Get your kids vaccinated. Most preventable death out there. On another note, learn CPR. Lots and lots of places teach it. It doesn't look anything like it does on TV. And the way we do CPR has changed now. It's not just for if your kid is having a heart attack. It's also for if your baby is choking. Baby CPR is a little trickier because you have to flip them over a few times and support their neck, so please do learn it. Babies and toddlers will put anything and everything in their mouths. You can look away for 2 seconds and they'll find that screw you lost and down the hatch. Of course, if they do swallow it and it doesn't go in their lungs, you got lucky. Story 19. I'm not currently a first responder, but I was for years, and when I finish my undergrad, I'll be back in it full time. Maintain your physical health. So many people drop dead at approximately 40 from poor physical health. Unless you enjoy the smell of burnt toast and sudden cardiac arrest, get healthy and stay healthy. Learn CPR. It's surprisingly easy and the training works in the real world. I learned CPR and have done it a handful of times as a first responder. You can increase the chances of your loved ones surviving a cardiac arrest by learning CPR. Use the mother ducking crosswalk. I've seen people twist it up, looking like they didn't have a bone in their body because they decided to run across the road and got hit by someone going 50 miles per hour. The driver gets all sorts of mental issues after that because you decided you didn't want to walk 200 feet to the closest intersection. And it's not even the driver's fault. Use a crosswalk. If your house is on fire, get the duck out. Yes, you may be able to save a few things and maybe you can put a fire out with your garden hose if you catch it in the growth stage. Do you know what you can't do though? Breathe in hydrogen cyanide and all those other superheated gases without becoming a dead person. You'd be surprised how many people think they can put the fire out and they end up dying right at the door. The crap ain't campfire smoke. Your couch is made of dead dinosaurs, son. Breathe in a few breaths of heated deadly smoke and you've already done irreparable mortal damage to yourself. Singed your lungs, making the amount of oxygen you get much less, and also the deadly smoke wants to bond to your oxygen cells a hell of a lot more than oxygen does, and even breathing it a little bit can inhibit your ability to absorb oxygen. If you're in a fire, get the duck out and avoid fire/smoke if at all possible. The stay low thing is true. A few feet in altitude can be several 100F different. Stay low and GTFO. If your house is on fire, be a good witness and call 911. Is there anybody in the house? If so, which room? Firefighters can do a rapid search if someone is in a specific room. If you're dead at the front door, they're going to focus on you and the fire, or it may take longer to find the other victim. Oh, lastly, listen to the police. You can get hurt by not listening to the police. Law enforcement, not the 80s band. Hands out of your pocket? Do it. Being detained in cuffs? Just let it happen. Under arrest? Don't resist. In the streets, an officer will always win. You're in the early stages of the justice system, and if you have a problem, you can take it to court or complain on the individual officer. Story 20. Drowning. Swim near and talk to a lifeguard. Use flotation, know your limitations and abilities, understand what a rip current looks like and how it works. Talk to your lifeguard. They know area-specific hazards and can educate you on conditions you may not understand. Use a life jacket or bodyboard, something attached to your person you won't lose if you are rolled by a wave. Set realistic limitations for your kids and yourself. The vast majority of people overestimate their swimming ability. I can't stress this enough. There is a fundamental difference between being able to swim across the deep end and being able to take care of yourself in open water. This is reflected in the fact that the majority of water rescues and drownings are for males who can swim. Rip currents occur when water is directed offshore, though a deep trench between sandbars or by a structure in or under the water, such as a jetty, reef, or pier, takes a water depth of approximately 1.4 times the wave height. For a wave to break, you can estimate the water depth this way. Unfortunately, people are intuitively drawn to the calmer water between the breaking waves, which is exactly where the rip current will form. Rip currents generally pull harder at low tide. There is less room for the water to move around. The sandbars create more of an obstruction. Think of it like putting a nozzle on a garden hose. Rip currents like organized surf as well. Organized surf produces organized currents. A 3 to 5 foot clean breaking long period wave looks inviting and manageable for most people with some swimming ability, but is the worst condition in regard to rip current.